The inn was quiet in the way a candle is quiet, steadfast, warm, and content to glow without being noticed. Outside, the night laid its cool hand across the roof shingles and the sleeping road, and the world softened at the edges. I, the keeper of stories, turned a page that did not need turning, simply to hear the gentle sound of paper against paper. The hearth sighed, the kettle rested. Even the shadows seemed to settle into more comfortable shapes. "Tonight," I said, as though speaking to the fire itself, "I will tell you of a unicorn and of an adventurer who learned the rarest craft of all." I let the words hang, light as dust motes in lantern glow. "Not the craft of fighting," I continued, "nor of conquest, nor even of finding. The craft of leaving things undisturbed." And so, with the inn holding us like a blanket, the story began. "There is a vale not far from here, close enough that a steady walker might reach it before the second star appears, and far enough that most never bother to look for it. It is not marked on maps that boast of treasures. No kings claim it. No banners snap above it. It simply exists, as valleys do. The vale is a shallow cup of land, ringed by old trees that lean inward as if sharing a secret. Mist gathers there in the evening, not as a warning, but as a habit, like a shawl pulled around the shoulders of the earth. Adventurers speak of the place the way people speak of a childhood dream they can't quite describe, softly, a little embarrassed, as though the telling might ruin it. They say that at dusk, only at dusk, a unicorn appears at the edge of the vale, where the grasses grow pale and fine, and where the wind always seems to remember a gentler language. Of course, adventurers are known for their stories. They exaggerate, they gild, they stack the ordinary into towers of wonder. A rabbit becomes a monster, a puddle becomes an ocean crossed. And yet, when enough different voices speak of the same quiet thing, it begins to feel less like a rumor and more like a truth waiting patiently to be seen. The unicorn, they say, does not grant wishes in the dramatic manner of tavern tales. It does not bow its head for a hero. It does not carry chosen riders into brilliant destinies. It does not even look really as though it wants to be understood. It simply comes. It stands half in mist, half in moonlight's first suggestion, and it breathes, slowly, deliberately, like the world itself is learning the rhythm from it. Some adventurers go searching with nets in their minds, ready to capture proof. Those adventurers return empty-handed, but others, those who go with open palms, return with something you cannot hang on a wall. There was one adventurer, no grand title, no shining parade of achievements, who first heard the unicorn spoken of in a low corner of a roadside tavern. The tavern was loud with dice and laughter, but the story came from a quiet table near the back, where a woman with weathered hands warmed her fingers around a mug. "It's not for chasing," she said without looking up. "If you chase it, you'll never see it." The adventurer, curious in the gentle way, not the hungry way, asked, "Then how does anyone see it at all?" The woman smiled, small and tired. "By being still," she said, "by being less." The adventurer let that sit for a moment, as one lets tea steep, then asked where the vale was. The woman pointed with her cup, as if gesturing toward a direction that wasn't a direction so much as a feeling. "Find the old birches that lean like listeners," she said, "and when the sky begins to dim, stop." The next evening, the adventurer left the inn at a time when the daylight still had a little gold in it, and walked along the road that curls away like a ribbon loosened from a gift. The air carried the scent of pine needles warming in late sun. Somewhere, a bird argued politely with another bird. The adventurer's boots made the softest crunch against gravel. They were not armored, not burdened with clanking confidence. Their pack was light: water, bread, a folded wool blanket, and a simple lantern they did not intend to light unless necessary. They passed familiar places, an old stone mile marker, a stump shaped like a chair, a brook that always sounded mildly amused. And as the sun lowered, the world shifted. Colors cooled, shadows lengthened without threat. The road seemed less like a path through land and more like a path through time. When birch trees appeared ahead, white trunks, black scars, leaning inward as if listening, the adventurer slowed. The vale was not obvious. There was no dramatic opening in the forest, no sudden vista that stole breath. Instead, the trees simply stepped back a little, politely, and the ground dipped in a shallow bowl. Mist already collected there, a thin veil curling around ankle-high grasses. The air felt cooler, but not cold. It felt newly washed. The adventurer didn't stride in. They didn't announce themselves to the silence. They remembered the woman's words, "Stop." So they chose a place beneath a birch at the edge, close enough to see into the vale, far enough to feel they were not intruding. They spread the wool blanket. They sat. No spell was spoken, no ritual performed. They simply became part of the evening. Above, the sky began to change its mind about being blue. A pale star appeared, shy and early. The mist thickened in slow curls, and the adventurer waited, not like waiting for a prize, but like listening for a familiar song. At first nothing happened, and that, I think, is where most people fail. They believe nothing is an empty thing, but nothing can be full. The adventurer noticed the sound of their own breath, and how it surprised the leaves when it came too quickly. They slowed it, not by force but by permission, in and out, as if their lungs were gently rocking a cradle. A moth passed through the dimming air, wobbling, uncertain whether the last light belonged to it. The grass bowed slightly as a small creature moved unseen within it. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a branch creaked. Not a warning, just a tree settling into its own posture. The adventurer did not reach for their lantern. They did not fidget. They let their hands rest on their knees, palms loose, fingers soft. The mist grew brighter, strangely, reflecting the first hints of moon. And then, a subtle change. Not a sound, not a flash, a sense that the vale had become attentive. At the far side of the vale, where the grasses met the shadow of trees, a shape formed. It did not appear like a trick. It appeared like a thought finishing itself. A pale curve, neck perhaps, then the line of a shoulder, the slope of a flank. The mist parted around it as water parts around a stone that has always been there, and the unicorn stood at the edge of the vale. It was not pure white as children draw. It was the color of moonlit ivory, with faint tones of silver and pearl, like light caught in snow before it melts. Its horn, yes, it had one, seemed less like a weapon and more like a spiral of calm, a gentle shape that made the eyes want to soften. The unicorn did not look toward the adventurer at first. It looked at the vale. It lowered its head to the grass, not to eat greedily, but to brush the blades with its breath. And where its breath touched, the grass lifted, as if waking. The adventurer remained still, but their heart did something human. It hurried. So they let it hurry, and then let it slow. They watched. The unicorn took a step, then another. Its hooves did not crush the grass. They seemed to barely press it, like a dancer touching the floor. Mist curled around its legs as if recognizing it. It moved in a slow arc along the vale's edge, pausing every few steps. Each pause was long enough to feel like a choice. When it breathed, the mist shifted. When it lifted its head, the air seemed to brighten by a fraction. The adventurer noticed that their thoughts were becoming quieter, not because they were trying to silence them, but because the thoughts simply didn't feel necessary in that place. A plan, usually so eager in an adventurer's mind, rose and fell away. A worry tried to announce itself, and forgot its words. The unicorn stood for a time with its head angled slightly, ears attentive, as though listening to something under the ground. Then it stepped closer to the center of the vale. In the center, the mist was thicker, like milk poured into dark tea. The unicorn moved into it, and for a moment its body became a suggestion rather than a certainty. The adventurer could still see the faint glimmer of its horn, the gentle outline of its back, the soft movement of its tail. And then the unicorn stopped. It placed one hoof forward and pressed, just enough. The earth responded, not with a tremor, nothing so violent, but with a subtle release, like a person unclenching a jaw they didn't realize was tight. The grasses around the hoof straightened. Tiny droplets lifted from the blades and floated, catching moonlight like small beads of glass. The adventurer blinked slowly, not wanting to miss anything, but also not wanting to stare too hard and turn wonder into work. The unicorn lifted its head and exhaled. The exhale was visible, pale and faint, and it drifted across the vale. Where it passed, the mist became smoother, less tangled, as if combed, and the adventurer's shoulders, without being told, lowered. The unicorn began to walk again, and the adventurer noticed something peculiar. It did not move randomly. It followed a pattern, like a careful gardener stepping where soil needs tending, like a healer moving from bedside to bedside, like someone smoothing wrinkles from a sheet. It paused near a patch of grass that lay flattened, perhaps from a deer's bed. It breathed there, and the grass lifted gently, no longer crushed. It stepped near a shallow puddle left by yesterday's rain. The puddle reflected a sliver of moon. The unicorn's presence seemed to still the surface until it looked like polished stone. A tiny frog at the puddle's edge didn't jump away. It simply existed, unafraid, as if the unicorn was not a threat but a weather, calm weather. The adventurer thought fleetingly of drawing closer, but the thought felt rude, like walking into someone's home uninvited, even if you admired the furniture. So the adventurer stayed at the edge, honoring distance as a kind of respect. Time in the vale moved differently, not faster, not slower, just softer. The unicorn's movements were unhurried, and the whole landscape seemed to follow its lead. The wind, if it came politely. Leaves did not chatter, they murmured. The adventurer found their own breathing matching the unicorn's rhythm, without effort. In and out, measured like a lullaby. They noticed their own hands. How often hands are clenched, even when nothing is being held. They let their fingers uncurl. The unicorn lifted its head and turned slightly, not fully toward the adventurer, just enough that the adventurer saw one dark eye, calm as deep water. There was no challenge in that gaze, no demand. It felt like being noticed by something ancient that did not judge. The adventurer felt strangely, as if the unicorn could see the shape of exhaustion inside them, and did not find it shameful. Then the unicorn turned away again, as if to say, "You are allowed to simply be here." After a while, the unicorn drifted toward the far edge of the vale again, where trees waited like quiet guardians. It paused near a cluster of wildflowers that had folded closed for night. The flowers looked like tiny sleeping hands. The unicorn lowered its head, not to eat them, never that, and breathed once, gently, over their closed petals. The petals did not open. Instead, they seemed to relax further into sleep, as though reassured. The adventurer's eyes grew heavy, not from boredom, but from comfort. The kind of comfort that makes the body remember it is safe. The unicorn took another step and another, then stood still, listening. The adventurer listened too, though they could not say what for. Perhaps for the sound of roots drinking, perhaps for the tiny creak of bark as the trees settled, perhaps for the almost silent music of the world maintaining itself. Then, very slowly, the unicorn began to fade, not vanishing like smoke, but receding like mist when morning comes. and the vale returned to being merely a vale. The adventurer remained seated even after the unicorn was gone. It felt important not to stand too quickly, not to break the spell of stillness by rushing back into motion. Above, the moon had risen more fully, and its light painted the birches with pale stripes. The mist still lingered, but it no longer seemed expectant. It was simply present. The adventurer looked at the grass where the unicorn had walked. Nothing was scorched, nothing was marked, no footprints remained. That, perhaps, was the point. The unicorn had come and left without leaving evidence for bragging rights. No trophy, no proof, just a feeling in the bones. The adventurer finally rose, slowly, feeling as though they had been gently unfolded. They gathered their blanket. They did not speak, even to themselves. When they walked back toward the road, their boots seemed quieter than before, and the night air, cool against their face, felt less like a challenge and more like a kindness. The next day, the adventurer did ordinary things. They ate, they refilled their water skin, they listened to the inn's soft sounds, the scrape of a chair, the murmur of conversation, the pop of resin in the fire. But inside them, something had shifted. Not a dramatic transformation, not a heroic revelation, more like a knot loosened. When someone spoke sharply, the adventurer did not absorb it like a bruise. When an old worry returned, it felt lighter, like a cloak they could take off. As evening approached, the adventurer found themselves checking the sky, not with urgency, with anticipation, gentle as a smile. They set out again at the same time, walking the same road, passing the same amused brook, the same stone marker, the same stump chair. And when the birches appeared, leaning inward like listeners, they slowed. They reached the edge of the vale, they spread their blanket, and they sat exactly as before. This time the waiting felt different. The adventurer did not scan the mist as though hunting for movement. They did not strain for proof. They simply allowed the evening to be what it was. In the distance, an owl spoke a single note. The sound did not echo. It sank into the trees. The mist gathered in familiar curls. The adventurer's breathing slowed more quickly now, as if their body remembered the pattern and was glad to return to it. They watched a star appear, then another, then a faint, shy third. And with each star, the veil seemed to deepen, like a bowl filling with quiet. When the unicorn came, it came the same way, not in a flash, but as a thought completing itself. The adventurer felt their heart jump again, but softer this time, like a child's excitement rather than an adult's anxiety. And the unicorn stood, still, as though the most important act in the world was to arrive calmly. On the second night, the adventurer noticed something they had missed before. The unicorn's coat was not only pale, it held subtle patterns, like faint ripples in water. As it moved, those patterns shifted, not as markings, but as reflections of moonlight and mist. It walked along the edge again, pausing at places that seemed slightly off. A patch of grass bent wrong, a swirl of mist knotted too tight, a small stone out of place. Each time the unicorn did something minimal, a breath, a step, a pause, and each time the land responded as though grateful. The adventurer realized this wasn't magic meant to impress. It was maintenance, the kind of care that no one applauds because no one notices when it's done well. The unicorn was a keeper too, in its own way, keeping the vale balanced and calm. The adventurer felt their respect deepen, and with that respect came a steadier stillness. Night after night the adventurer returned. Some nights the mist was thicker, some nights thinner. Some nights the moon hid behind clouds and the vale felt like a closed eye, but always the pattern held. Walk the road, find the birches, sit at the edge, breathe, and sometimes the unicorn would come. Not every night. That mattered too, because if it came every time, the adventurer might begin to expect it, and expectation can be a kind of grasping. So the adventurer practiced something else. They practiced being content with the vale even without the unicorn. They practiced listening to ordinary sounds as though they were enough. They practiced letting the mind wander gently, like a leaf floating downstream, and then letting it settle. On nights the unicorn did appear. It felt like a gift, not a guarantee, and on nights it did not. The vale was still beautiful, still quiet, still kind. As days passed, the adventurer began to notice changes not only in the vale, but in themselves. Their steps became less heavy. Their shoulders no longer carried the same invisible pack of tension. They found themselves smiling at small things, steam rising from soup, the way sunlight warmed a windowsill, the soft thud of a book closing. And there were changes in how they spoke, too. Adventurers often fill silence with plans, where to go next, what to do, what to conquer. But the adventurer spoke less, and when they did speak, it was gentler. One evening, another guest at the inn asked, "What are you searching for out there?" The adventurer paused, then answered truthfully. "Nothing," they said. The guest laughed, thinking it a joke, but the adventurer's face was calm, and in their calmness was a quiet certainty. Sometimes nothing is exactly what you need. One dusk, the adventurer arrived at the vale and found someone already sitting at the edge. A young person, an aspiring adventurer perhaps, wrapped in a cloak too big for them, knees pulled close, watching the mist with hungry eyes. The older adventurer almost turned back. They did not want to disturb, but the young one noticed them and made a small, hopeful gesture as if asking, "Is this the place?" The older adventurer sat a little distance away, careful not to crowd. No words were spoken. That felt important. The young adventurer fidgeted, shifting, adjusting their cloak, tapping fingers against their knee like impatient rain. The older adventurer simply breathed. Slowly, the young one's movements quieted, as if their body borrowed calm from the air. The mist thickened, stars appeared, and then the unicorn came, not startled by the presence of two, not hurried. It appeared as it always did, like the evening finishing a sentence, and both adventurers watched, still and silent, learning together. The unicorn moved into the vale, and the young adventurer leaned forward, just slightly. Their desire to be closer was almost visible, like heat shimmer. But the older adventurer did not scold. They did not correct with words. They simply stayed still. And that stillness acted like a gentle hand on the young one's shoulder. The young one eased back. The unicorn paused near the center, pressed a hoof into the earth, and exhaled. The mist smoothed. Droplets lifted and floated, catching starlight. The young one's eyes widened, but their breath slowed. The older adventurer noticed, wonder does not need motion. Wonder can be quiet. The unicorn turned its head, just enough for both to see its calm eye. Again, no judgment, just presence. Then it turned away and continued its careful, maintenance-like path, tending the vale as if it were a sleeping child, smoothing blankets, quieting corners. When it faded, both adventurers remained seated, and the young one, without being told, stayed still after it was gone. After that night, the young adventurer sometimes came, and sometimes did not. But when they did, they sat a little more quietly than before. They asked fewer questions, not because curiosity died, but because they learned that some answers are not made of words. The older adventurer continued their visits, sometimes alone, sometimes not. Seasons began to shift. The air grew sharper. The mist sometimes carried the faint scent of frost. Leaves at the vale's edge yellowed, then browned, then fell with soft, papery sighs. The unicorn still came, though its coat seemed brighter against the darker season, like moonlight made visible. On one evening, a thin snow began to fall, slow flakes drifting like feathers. The unicorn appeared through falling snow, and for a moment it looked like a figure made entirely of winter's hush. It moved gently, and the snow around its hooves settled without being crushed, as if even snow was treated with respect. The adventurer's life, of course, continued beyond the vale. There were errands, there were conversations, there were ordinary obligations that tugged at sleeves, but the vale became a kind of anchor point, a place where the adventurer remembered how to soften. When the world felt too loud, they thought of the unicorn's calm eye. When their mind raced ahead, they remembered the unicorn's slow steps. When they felt the old urge to chase, answers, victories, proofs, they remembered the unicorn was seen by not chasing. One night a storm threatened, clouds gathered, wind worried the branches, the inn's shutters rattled. The adventurer considered staying inside, safe and warm, but the urge to go was not reckless, it was gentle. So they went, wrapped in cloak, hood pulled low. The birches leaned like listeners in the wind. The vale was darker, the mist pressed low. The adventurer sat at the edge anyway, and they breathed. The unicorn did not appear that stormy night. But something else happened, something subtle, and perhaps more important. The adventurer listened to the wind moving through the trees and realized the vale itself was still a lesson, even without its most famous visitor. The wind sounded wild, but not cruel. The mist curled and shifted, and the adventurer watched it the way one watches thoughts, arriving, changing shape, passing on. A drop of rain tapped the adventurer's cloak, then another. Then a soft rhythm began, like fingers drumming gently on fabric. The adventurer felt their body accept the storm, not as an enemy, but as weather. And in accepting it, they discovered a quiet strength, not the strength of fighting, the strength of allowing. After some time, the adventurers stood, bowed their heads slightly toward the vale, an acknowledgement, a thank you, and returned to the inn, damp but peaceful. Inside, the fire welcomed them, and they slept deeply. When the storms passed, the air cleared in a way that made every sound sharper. Footsteps on the road sounded crisp. The brook's amusement sounded brighter. Even the inn's creaks felt like old friends stretching. The adventurer returned to the vale again at dusk. The mist was thinner that evening, and the sky was clean, scattered with stars like spilled sugar. They sat, blanket spread, hands resting loosely, and the unicorn came. It appeared near the far trees, brighter than ever, as if the storm had washed the world and left the unicorn shining. It walked into the vale, paused, and for the first time, it moved closer to the edge, closer than before. Not directly toward the adventurer, but near enough that the adventurer could see the delicate movement of its chest as it breathed. The adventurer did nothing, no reaching, no whispering, no pleading. They simply allowed the unicorn to choose its distance. The unicorn lowered its head and breathed across the grass near the edge, and the grass lifted, shimmering with dew, a quiet gift offered without demand. The unicorn remained near the edge longer than usual. It stood partly in mist, partly in moonlight, and its presence made the vale feel like a sanctuary. The adventurer felt tears prick unexpectedly, not from sadness, but from relief. Relief is strange. It often arrives after we've forgotten we were carrying weight. The adventurer kept their gaze soft, not staring too hard. The unicorn's ear flicked as though it heard the adventurer's breath. Then, slowly, it turned its head, more fully this time. Its calm eye met the adventurer's. The moment lasted long enough to feel real, but not so long as to become intense. In that gaze, the adventurer felt something wordless. You do not have to prove yourself here. You do not have to earn calm. Calm is allowed. The unicorn exhaled once, a faint white breath in cool air, and the exhale drifted between them like a gentle bridge. Then the unicorn turned away again, as if to say, "That is all." And that was enough. Over the following nights, the adventurer began to understand the unicorn's true lesson. The unicorn did not come to perform, it came to tend. It came to balance the vale the way a keeper tends a hearth, quietly, steadily, without applause. And the adventurer's role was not to interrupt that tending with desire. Their role was to witness without grasping. This was difficult at first, because adventurers are trained to take action, to do, to push, to claim. But the adventurer practiced another skill, being present. They learned that presence itself can be a kind of courage. It takes courage to sit with your own thoughts without fleeing into distraction. It takes courage to let wonder exist without trying to own it. It takes courage to accept a gift that cannot be displayed. The adventurer realized they were becoming a different kind of adventurer, one who could travel far and also stop. One evening, the young adventurer returned again, cloak a little less oversized now, posture a little steadier. They sat beside the older adventurer, still at a respectful distance, not too close, not too far. The vale was calm. The mist rose in familiar curls. Stars appeared as if on schedule, and the unicorn came as if it had been listening for their quiet arrival. It moved into the vale, and both adventurers watched. The young one did not fidget. The older one did not instruct. They simply sat and breathed. The unicorn walked its slow pattern, pausing, exhaling, stepping, smoothing the veil. Then, for the briefest moment, it lifted its head and stood very still, as though it was satisfied, as though everything was in place. The mist became smooth. The grasses stood gently. Even the air seemed to rest. Then the unicorn faded, returning the veil to ordinary quiet. The young adventurer whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." Not to the older adventurer, to the veil, to the moment. And the older adventurer smiled in the dark. When I tell this story, people sometimes ask, quietly, as if afraid to break it, what happened next? Did the adventurer ever touch the unicorn? Did the unicorn ever speak? Did it ever grant a wish? But those questions belong to a louder kind of tale. In this tale, the answer is simple. The adventurer returned, again and again, until returning itself became a kind of healing. And when life eventually asked them to leave, because life always does, they carried the veil inside them like a small lantern. Not a lantern that blazed, a lantern that glowed steadily, softly, just enough to remind them, you can be calm anywhere if you practice. Sometimes the unicorn came, sometimes it didn't. But the lesson remained, even on empty evenings. Stillness is not failure. Distance can be respect. And the most magical thing you can do some nights is to sit down and breathe. Back in the inn, the fire was lower now, coals glowing like embers of memory. The room felt even softer than before, as if the story itself had smoothed the corners. I, the keeper of stories, closed the book, slowly, so the sound would not startle the quiet. "If there is a lesson," I said, voice low as a blanket, "it is not a command. It is an invitation. Some of us move through life like adventurers who must always be proving, always chasing, always conquering the next hill. But the unicorn does not chase the evening, it arrives within it. And the adventurer in our tale did not become wiser by taking something. They became wiser by letting something be. I let the hush settle. So tonight, I murmured, if your thoughts are restless, you do not have to fight them. Sit at the edge of your own veil. Watch them pass like mist. And if calm appears, quietly without fanfare, let it stand near you for a while. The hearth sighed. The inn held steady, and the night, gentle and unhurried, carried the story onward, into sleep. If you find yourself not quite ready to leave the fire, there is another tale waiting for you. It rests just nearby, quiet and unhurried. You may click it now and let the story carry you a little further into rest.